Good morning, YouTube world. Sister Danger here. Yesterday, I had what I suspect was my very first significant run-in with the SJW crazy train, and I was left really unsettled by the turn of events in this conversation, so I wanted to take that to YouTube and discuss my thoughts on that today. So to give a little bit of context here, I was involved in a conversation resultant from a friend of mine posting a link to the recent McGraw-Hill textbook debacle with the caption up above saying, "What the fuck is wrong with white people?" So for those who aren't up on the story, the gist is this. A high school student took a picture of a caption in his geography textbook that referred to the African slave trade slaves as immigrants and workers. He sent this text to his mother, who took exception to the reference of slaves as being immigrants and workers because work implies that you are getting paid or compensated, and so she complained to McGraw-Hill. McGraw-Hill responded by saying, "You know what, we could do better. We will change this immediately in our online copy of the textbook, and we will change it for the next publication." Now, I've known this person for many years, so when I see them share this article with the comment of, "What the fuck is wrong with all white people?" I thought to myself, well, that seems a little extreme for this person, so I went ahead and asked on their Facebook. At the risk of sounding ignorant, I'm not really sure I understand the outrage over this particular change. So here is the answer that I was given to the question of outrage. It's that they did it in the first place, that it was written, edited, proofed, printed, and distributed, and no one thought anything of it until it was in the hands of students. When you are taken from your home to a foreign country against your will, you have not immigrated, you have been abducted. When you are forced under pain of physical punishment or even death to work without pay for the benefit of someone else, you are not a worker, you are a slave. We're all agreed that when a person is forced to do work with no compensation, that is in fact what constitutes slavery. So I said, I get all that. I guess it just seems like quite a leap to go from this was in a textbook to every step of the entire process was done via the sheer callousness of white people. And that's where the crazy train jumped the shark, Your Honor. I'll not recount the entire conversation verbatim. Suffice it to say that I was told a number of things, such as I have inherent privilege by virtue of being white, and then it was really heavily inferred that I should feel guilty and ashamed for this. Denying my privilege is proof of my privilege. I can only get rid of my privilege by agreeing that I have privilege. When I mentioned that this was all very circular reasoning and not even related to the original question that I had asked, I was told that I was being trivial by asking a bunch of nitpicky questions. The fact that I felt the need to respond at all and then continued to rebut the points that were being made at me was proof that I was being defensive and that I had already contracted white privilege and I was just in a state of denial about it. Putting aside the fact that calling me defensive is basically an ad hominem which attacks me as a person instead of addressing the questions and points that are being made, of course I'm going to be defensive. And if having the sheer audacity to stand up in my own self-defense means that I'm going to be labeled as defensive, then I guess I'm just going to have to bear the burden of being labeled as defensive. So I'd like to pause here for a minute to talk about privilege. Privilege is an unearned benefit above and beyond the status quo that one person has access to that other people do not. A good example of this in the United States is that all citizens can expect fair and equal treatment under the law. If for some reason it happens to be the case that a particular person or demographic does not get that fair and equal treatment, it does not mean that another demographic is privileged. What it means is that those who cannot expect the status quo of treatment are the underprivileged ones. We do not fix a situation of racial, gender, sexual inequalities by creating a system of infinite reduction in advantages. I'm sure you can see where this is going and how this regression does nothing to serve the aggrieved party and only detriments all parties. There's a whole body of studies going back some 50-odd years which inform us that racism is not simply a matter of choice or upbringing, but rather it is a matter of our human tribalistic nature. And the best way that we overcome our xenophobic nature is by commingling with one another such that we become exposed to members of other tribes, as it were. We do not solve the problem of racial, gender, or sexual inequality by continually refining the tribe to be smaller and smaller and smaller and setting up controversial us versus them situations. Rather, we solve this issue by mingling tribes until we become an amalgamation of what was once formerly separate tribes. Back to the original story at hand. The final clincher on this for me was this little gem of an exchange, wherein I said, if I deny white privilege, that's proof that I have it. If I own up to it, that's proof that I have it. It is painfully circular reasoning of which there is no way out. I'm sorry, I just don't buy into racial guilt tripping. Whether or not I buy into it still makes no difference because the whole idea is designed to be incontrovertible. And the response was, suit yourself. It's like science, though. It exists, whether you believe in it or not, and it makes a good deal of difference to those around you. This reply is mind-boggling, and so whenever I encounter something like this, I like to play a little game with myself. Suit yourself. It's like the Eiffel Tower, though. Suit yourself. It's like the flying spaghetti monster, though. Suit yourself. It's like your shoes. Suit yourself. It's like the patriarchy. Whether you believe in it or not, it exists. The differences between these various examples is that I can always ask the question of how do I know it exists? And in some cases there is objective empirical evidence, and in other cases there is subjectivity and anecdote. Suffice it to say, this whole conversation ended as a moot point because I simply refused to participate in racial shaming. I refused to agree that asking questions is inappropriate, and I refuted the notion that I was some kind of racial sinner by happenstance of being born white. These types of arguments and ideologies are truly doublethink, and they should be met at every single turn with the relentless force of rationality. It's my hope in sharing this with everyone today that those who experience similar situations are encouraged to stand up for themselves and not be browbeat into submission by some trendy Orwellian mindset. As always, I will put links to the various articles and things that were referenced in the video into the comments below. I would really appreciate everybody's replies and comments. Feel free to ask me any questions or make any rebuttals if that suits you. This is a topic that both sides do tend to feel very attacked on, and so I would again like to stress the request to please try to keep comments civil towards one another and constructive. I hope to see you all next time. Thanks. Kitty.